Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Spurs Chat podcast. In this edition, I'll be talking to Martin Lipton, the Sun's chief sports reporter. Martin, great to have you here. Of course, you're here to talk about Tottenham Hotspur, and every single time you're normally on once or twice a year, and the manager changes, and it's happened again.
I like to think that I'm a constant presence in an ever-changing universe.
Martin, first of all, how are you? What have you been up to in this last year or so?
Well, I've done a few things. I went to the Olympics in the summer, and then I've watched Spurs, and I felt gradually more miserable with each passing week. And then we had a moment of epiphany, which was wonderful in Bilbao. And then reality, I think, set in. And I've just come hot foot from Queens, watching Emma Raducanu this afternoon. So, my life is full of blessings, I always think.
Always busy, always busy. Well, great to have you here. Always very insightful and very knowledgeable. One of my favourite guests, in actual fact, and I'm not just saying that because you're here. I always enjoy talking to you.
You must have a really low bar.
Martin, first of all, how would you describe Ange Postecoglou's time at Spurs? Of course, 2 years to the day, and then sacked. We'll talk about the last couple of weeks shortly, but overall, how do you assess these 2 years in charge?
I think roller coaster doesn't really give it due strength, really. There are some fantastic high moments, but also some unbelievably low ones. And obviously the ultimate high was effectively the last moment in many ways, a moment that will never be forgotten, and rightly so. That night in Bilbao was, for many people, the highlight of their Spurs supporting life. I mean, I'm a bit older than the majority of people watching this, I suspect. But my boy's 15, and he just said it was the greatest night of his life, watching Spurs. That was it, watching it at home with me, watching Spurs win a trophy. And that would have, been the view of many, many supporters, without question. And there'll be enormous debt of gratitude to the manager for delivering that, and rightly so. But overall, the 2 years have, I would say that the number of lows is certainly, in terms of quantum, has certainly exceeded the number of highs. There have been individual matches where they've been quite excellent. Even this season, Man City away, prime example. But far too often for me, post that Chelsea game in November 2023, it's been car crash viewing, a team you only watch from behind the sofa with your hands over your eyes. If you and I and everybody else can see the glaring issues, and it's not our job to see the glaring issues, why can't the manager? Why can't the coaching team? Why can't somebody just say, come on, do something about it? It's great to have a philosophy. It's brilliant to have a way of playing. It's outstanding to know what you want to do. But you can't be so rigid that you don't change that you don't adapt, that you can't realize that the personnel don't work. You can't play a high line with Dragusin and Davis and Gray at centre-half in various combinations. You can't play any sort of system with a donut midfield in a massive hole where no one's making a tackle. And to think you can keep on getting away with it is crazy. They do say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, by that metric, people might ask some questions about Ange Postecoglou's doctor, because seriously, that was insanity. It made no sense. And I hate saying that, because without question, he's a terrific bloke. He ticked so many of the boxes for Spurs at the start. He definitely changed the culture in those first few months. He united the fan base in those first few months. He even got people to stop singing about Daniel Levy in the first few months. But not for long, and not for long enough. And in the end, you come away thinking he's done something really important for the future of the club. He has left a legacy which can't be argued with. He deserves to be in the pantheon of the trophy-winning managers, the European trophy-winning managers. He deserves to be remembered with applause, to be feted when and if he comes back to the club. all of that at the same time, it was absolutely the right decision to let him go. And I know that that's a divisive position because it's a divisive argument. There are loads of fans who think differently, who think that that one night in Bilbao transcends everything. And to a degree, I agree, it does. But it can't allow you to forget, because of one 90-minute performance, in fact, one 90-minute win, not one 90-minute performance, if we're being brutally honest, one 90-minute win, what happened over the previous 9 months. Because for much of that, it was beyond shambolic.
Martin, some people would say if he had a stronger squad, more depth, and we've also seen that he can play a more pragmatic way, you know, in that Europa League competition. I know you've already answered it, but you know, do you understand why so many people feel like he should have had a third season?
Absolutely. And if they had, if the club had decided to keep him on, I'd have had no problem with it. I wouldn't have agreed with the decision, but I wouldn't have been screaming and shouting, and because he did win the trophy. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that he changed the tactics. I think that's the players have decided, because even if you're going to play slightly deeper, you're still going to invert your fullbacks. They stopped inverting. They played deeper. They worked it out themselves, and he's gone along with it. It feels to me. Maybe I'm wrong, and he'll tell me otherwise, I'm sure. And that's just my opinion. And what do I know? But that's the way it felt to me, that it was a player-led change of tactics. And we were all crying out for it.
Yeah.
For a long, long time. Why did it take so long if it was the manager's call? And that's the thing that I can't understand, because of everything I said before, that it was abundantly clear to anybody. You don't need your UEFA Pro license to see it. What was going wrong? Yes, there were a lot of injuries, no question. And I said that Chelsea game where he not only loses the 2 red cards for Udogie and Romero, but he also loses Maddison and Van de Ven. But if you look at the sheer series of injuries, at some point you've got to question why that's happening. And that's about training. More important for me, it's about style of play. If you're asking your best centre-half, who's got a track record of having a slightly dodgy hamstring, to sprint 25 times every half, what's going to happen to his hamstring? If you've got other players who have too many injuries, what's going to happen to them? It's if you're overplaying the same players, agreed, but then he's in charge of recruitment to a degree. He wanted certain players. He wanted them to play that way. I do think that there's a degree of responsibility for him as well. Not totally, because contact injuries, there's nothing you can do about. Contact injuries just happen, the nature of the game. But muscle injuries are something different. And that's where I look at the coaching staff, or the manager in particular, and the medical staff, because they have a responsibility to say to the manager, Fred Smith's in the red zone. John's got to be looked after. And if they get overplayed, guess what? They get injured.
Martin, what have you made of all of the players coming out on social media thanking Ange Postecoglou? And this is very different, isn't it, to what we've seen, when past managers have gone out the door, and even when Premier League managers go out the door, not this amount of players normally come out and write all of these messages of support.
I think it's a testament to him as a human being. There's no question. I mean, there'll be one or two who didn't like him because they weren't in the team, but most of them genuinely, clearly liked him as a bloke. That doesn't mean they thought he was a great manager. They just thought he's a really good human being. The video he showed them before the final was symptomatic of that. I've seen some of the things he said when he was Australia coach, the same sort of thing, tapping into the emotion of the players. And he's really good at man management. I don't think there's any question about it. I think he's a thoroughly nice fella. And they recognise that, and so they should. So I don't think it's cosmetic in any way. I think it's a genuine outpouring of emotion. But remember the stuff that Harry Kane wrote about Conte, and other players have said things about. They also recognise that things in football change quite swiftly. There's always somebody else coming through, and whoever the new manager is, they get another chance. So they'll move on swiftly. One or two of the players might not like it, but the rest of them, they'll look at their 250 grand a week and think, okay, who's the next gaffer?
I tell you what, Martin, I don't know whether you keep up to date with the Australian media, but they are far from happy with this decision of Postecoglou going out the door. Jared Watley from
whenever did we care about what the Australian media said about football? With no disrespect to my great colleagues down under, who are fine people, really good. Do you not think they've got a bit of a dog in the show here? You know, come on.
Well, the mayor of Melbourne has come out and said that Spurs shouldn't be remembered for being allergic to trophies, which there's been some very harsh and emotional comments from Australia. But what I wanted to ask you is,
look, I'll tell you one thing. There was a bloke who was sacked by Collingwood the other week. What an absolute disgrace. We should ban and Carlton. Who cares? Honestly, my knowledge of my input in NRL or footy or whatever is equally irrelevant as what the mayor of Melbourne thinks about Spurs. I'm sorry. I don't care what the mayor of Melbourne thinks about Melbourne. What he thinks about Spurs.
This is why I've got you here, for opinions. This is why I've got you here. Martin, what have you made of like these decisions in recent times? Because we've had 19 different managers in 24 years. You know, how can Spurs keep going on, replacing managers, bringing in a new manager? I know we're going to talk about Thomas Frank shortly, but the way I see it is that Ange Postecoglou, in my opinion, is a very clever man. He would have seen what people have done in the past. You know, we've brought in win now managers. They haven't got us over the line. And he would have seen that. And it's funny as well, because the club in their club statement said that we want to be fighting on all fronts. He clearly knew that he didn't have a squad to be fighting on all fronts. We weren't ever going to get top four. We weren't going to get Champions League for next season via the league.
Hold on, Chris. This is quite interesting. We weren't ever going to get top four.
Not the season just gone. No.
I take you back to November. We've got Ipswich at home. We win that game. We're third. If we beat Ipswich at home. That's nearly halfway through the season. It all unravelled from that period.
With a long way to go.
Yes, but you can't tell me that a team that's third in November isn't able to challenge for the top five. I'm not having that at all.
The way that
inevitable, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't beat Leicester. And he lost at home to Leicester and Ipswich. Come on. He lost at home to absolute rubbish all season.
I agree.
They didn't even turn up at half the away games.
Yeah.
Yes, from March onwards, fair enough. You make the call. Even then, it was unacceptable. The performance at Fulham, do me a favour.
I agree.
That. Seriously.
Yeah.
He and they should be doing better, even if you're prioritising the Europa League.
Yeah.
If you say prioritising the Europa League, why did he play all the kids against Elfsborg? Who scored, by the way, but you know, on that weekend he prioritised the Premier League and still lost.
Yeah. It's interesting, Martin, how you mentioned that Fulham away game, because, as you know, I go to every home and away game, and I saw those 22 league defeats, and it wasn't hard to, it wasn't easy to take all those defeats, by the way. But that Fulham away game is when I started to doubt Ange Postecoglou. I'd given, him a lot of patience. I want it to work. The club have talked about patience a lot of the time. And as I've mentioned, all these managers, but the amount of injuries that we had, and I know some people say, oh, you can't keep using excuses. You've got to find a way to win. I do agree with that to a certain extent. But my point earlier, what I was trying to make is that I felt in the summer that we didn't do enough in that summer transfer window to fight on all fronts, if you like, because the club. I
can stop that argument, yeah, but it wasn't if they didn't spend any money in the summer. They spent 65 million on a centre forward. They got in two. They spent 70-80 million on Bergvall and Gray. They got in Odegaard injured before kicking the ball. That didn't help. So this idea that they've not spent any money is preposterous and frankly wrong.
Yeah,
you can argue that it wasn't spent in the right areas. But then again, you look at the numbers, the bodies they had. You've got Spence and Porro at the right. You've got Udogie and Davis as left back. You start the season with Romero, Van der Ven, Dragusin as centre halves. You've got Sarr and Bentancur, whose loss for 7 games was a blow, and I think that didn't help. And Bissouma, who's been a joke for me, apart from the odd game, for 3 years and probably needs to go. And Maddison and Kulusevski and Johnson and Richarlison and Solanke and Odegaard and Son. Tell me how that finishes 17th.
Yeah.
Tell me how that finishes 17th.
That's team and squad should never be finished in 17th.
Yeah.
But
No.
in my opinion, I didn't feel that we'd done enough in that transfer window with experienced players. But I bought in, and I'm sure a lot of people also did, that this was meant to be a rebuild that was going to take time and for everyone to give patience to. And it's interesting because when I ask you about the decisions overall that have been made in recent years, let's go back to Pochettino, 2019, took us to a Champions League final, didn't spend money in multiple transfer windows, took us to that Champions League final, was sacked a couple of months later, brought Jose Mourinho in, sacked 6 days before a final. Then Nuno Espirito Santo, Antonio Conte. Conte went in a press conference, told a lot of home truths, was then fired. We've gone through so many different managers. What have you made of these decisions of these particular managers going out the door?
They're all different. So Pochettino, at the time, I said, don't sack him. Just put him on, even though you can't do it, find a way to put him on sabbatical to the end of the season because he's knackered. He was just worn out by the whole thing. It would have been better for him to leave after the Champions League final, win or lose, because he was just drained. You could see there was nothing left. And he would have done with a year out would have been fine for him. If there's a way you could get rid of him and keep him on the books and bring someone in as a temporary manager, I'd have done that. I know that's not possible. No one was complaining when Mourinho came in at all. The reality is it wasn't working. We know that. That second season, they started really well and then dropped off a cliff. We knew then it was sort of falling apart, didn't we? Let's be honest. The one that I'll never understand is Nuno. And I've said this before. He was never going to fit. He was everything the club is not about. Football is, there are 2 types of manager. There's the romantic and the pragmatist, shall we call it? The cavalier and the roundhead. The purist and the anti-football manager. Now, we've swapped between them. Look, Conte and Mourinho, and one we didn't have, Rafa Benitez, are roundheads. No question. They don't want the ball. Spurs managers should always want the ball. Nuno makes Mourinho look like a purist. He never wants the ball, other than on the counter-attack twice a game. And there's nothing wrong with playing that football. Tottenham Hotspur should never play that football. It's not what the club's about. So he was just the wrong fit. He's done a great job. He did a brilliant job at Wolves. He's done a fabulous job at Forest this season. They just ran out of legs and ran out of belief in themselves at the end of the season. He's a very, very good manager if you don't want the ball. So therefore, he was never going to be the right fit for Tottenham, come what may, because Spurs want the ball. You can't have 70% of the ball every game, obviously. There are times when you've got to dig in and you've got to suffer, as the Italians say, but not as a way of playing, which is what we had. We then ended up with Conte taking the same players and playing pretty much the same way with a bit more defensive stability until he decided that he didn't want to be in Spurs anymore. And rather than going to Daniel Levy in the ball and saying, look, 2 of my best friends have died this year. I'm a bit worried about my health. I want to go back to Italy. Can we do a deal? He said, I'm going to blow up the club, which is what he did at Southampton. He just let the hand grenade go and didn't care how much damage he caused. And that was disgraceful. Utterly disgraceful. And that's not the board's fault. That's not Daniel Levy's fault. That's Antonio Conte's fault. So he's gone from that to a very different approach with Postecoglou. And I think it's seen its natural end. Now, what you need now is a manager who can combine attacking instincts with defensive discipline, with tactical acumen, with the ability to change things. not just in game, but from game to game, because that's what you need. Pochettino's team evolved, didn't it? Look at what he did. He started off with a young squad, and he had Eunice Cabal as captain. Within 3 minutes, Cabal was out the frame, not going to be seen again. If you didn't get on with him, poor old Andros Townsend, one row with the coach, he was toast. He changed the way they played. He went from a 4 to a 3 to back to a 4, etc. He was willing to evolve as the players evolved. Mm. That's the sort of manager we want. And we're going to come on to it, but I can see clear parallels in the Pochettino, slightly younger, of 2014 with the situation we're about to embark on from tomorrow or Thursday or whenever it is that Thomas Frank is unveiled as Tottenham manager.
Martin, you mentioned Pochettino. Would you like to see him back one day?
I wouldn't be unhappy if he did. But that doesn't necessarily mean it'd be great for anyone, because he'll always be judged by what he did. If he comes into a team that's won trophies, not just one, but 2 or 3 trophies, given the success he's had at winning trophies at other clubs since he left Spurs and the performances since he left Spurs, I think it'd be easier for him. But if he comes into another 5 years without a trophy, please not, then he's back where he was when he joined the club and when he left the club.
Yeah.
So he won't be available for at least 18 months. He's going to do the World Cup with the Americans, because it's going to cost 20 million to get him out, and he actually thinks he needs to see it through, and he wants to see it through. And I'm not sure, despite the relationship he had at different times with Daniel, that he'd necessarily come back under this board, because it's difficult, isn't it? They let him go. Yeah.
Martin, I want to ask you about the board. Do you feel like the criticism of Daniel Levy is fair by the fan base? And also, what do you make of the shake-up at Spurs at board level? Because, of course, Donna Cullen's now gone out the door. Vinay Venkatesham has now come in. It looks like Fabio Pracci might return as well.
Look, it's very easy to blame Daniel for all the ills of the club. And as the chairman, he must take responsibility. And if you just say that maybe he's been more obsessed with the balance sheet and the accounting table than the football table, I think that's a legitimate argument. But then again, he's been determined to put the club on a secure and sound financial footing, which he has done. He has delivered the training ground and the stadium. And if we'd won 3 more trophies, if we won 3 of those finals, this criticism of Daniel wouldn't be there. If we turned up against Liverpool or against Chelsea or against Man City, if we played better in the semi-final against Chelsea, and it was Pochettino who plays Son at left back, nobody else, in 17. If we'd won one of those league titles, 16, 17 is a better example than 15, 16. Yeah. I do think that it would have been different. No, we didn't, and therefore he'll be the Aunt Sally, he'll be the scapegoat, he'll be the easy one to criticize. And the ultimate scenario, yes, he's responsible. He's been in charge for 25 years and won League Cup and now won Europa League. Is not an acceptable return for a club of Tottenham's size. But he's not the only reason or the main reason. He is a reason. The board must take responsibility, but it's a wider load of blame, I would argue. The changes are interesting. Look, Donna I've known for a very long time. And we've had some nice conversations and some less nice conversations. Donna always saw herself as fiercely protective of Daniel, the gatekeeper almost. She was desperate. She felt that she had a duty and obligation to protect Daniel from criticism. Sometimes I think she overdid that, but I never doubted her desire for the right reasons. You might not agree with those reasons, but I don't think there was ever anything manipulative or unpleasant about the rationale behind what she did. She's now left, and that leaves a vacuum which is being filled. Now, Vinay, I've known since he went through the ropes at Arsenal, and he's a really decent bloke, no question about that. Really smart, has been involved with football decisions at Arsenal. Well, now you may question whether they all worked or not, but that's a different matter. Obviously, Peter Charrington, who I don't know at all, but it's a really smart fellow and part of the old Enoch empire, is now been put onto the board with a what appears to be a prominent role. I don't quite know what that will mean. If Paratici comes back, that gives you a European transfer market manipulator. We know that. Kulusevski and Bentancur have proved positive. He served his ban, and I think that it would be foolish if you can take advantage of his services not to do so, given the track record he's got. But he also has to work with the manager. He also has to work with the whole structure. That needs to be more cohesive, holistic, you might say. I think there's been a little bit of a schism between various parts of the club, or more of a fracturing actually in the schism, to be honest. That people have felt disparate and not necessarily, they're all working in their own little silos rather than having a homogenous whole concept. And I think that's where it needs to change. There needs to be a sense of unity and purpose from top to bottom. That is not easy. You don't fix that with a wave of a wand. It needs everyone to buy into it. It needs the manager to buy into it. It needs the fans to buy into the manager to buy into it. It needs the board to listen to the manager, for the fans to buy into the manager to buy into it. So my arms are moving around. So that's all part, I think, of where it needs to go. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. If it doesn't happen, it'll be abundantly clear to all of us that it's not happening. Over the next few months, we will know. Do the transfer dealings appear joined up or not? Is there a philosophy about the way they're going about things? Is it purely short-term thinking, medium-term thinking, or long-term thinking? If it's purely long-term thinking, the fans will not be happy. If it's purely short-term thinking, that might not be a smart play either. It has to be a fusion of the both. You want a couple of senior experienced players, and then another couple in their mid-20, in their sort of 23, 24. And then maybe if there's a young one that you can bring, something like that makes a degree of sense. You know, we've got one young kid coming in already, we know, who's spent the last 2 years in Belgium, in Vuskovic. And I spoke to a really senior bloke in Croatian football the other week who I happen to know, who's told me that in Croatia, they think he is the next Gvardiol. That's how highly they rate him. Now, if he's anywhere near that, that's the result. Let's be honest. I don't know. I've not seen him play other than a couple of clips of him scoring headers in the Belgium Jupiler League. I can't judge from that. But you know, there's a player coming in who may be young, may be really, really talented.
Martin, you mentioned there that you know Vinay. What will he bring to Tottenham that we haven't had in the past?
I think you'll find he's a bit more open to explanations. He's not scared of a microphone.
Okay.
And one of the genuine criticisms of people at Spurs is you'd never know what they think because they never let you know what they think, other than a quote from Daniel on a press release every 6 months. And that's indicative of the nature of the man. He is not someone who likes to give of himself too much. He believes he operates best in the shadows, and he's got a reputation for doing decent deals. Vinay I think Vinay will be willing to speak to the supporters. I think that's in his nature. I think he also knows he's got to convince them that he's not an Arsenal man, that he's working for the club. And I think he'll do that. I think someone told me he's a Liverpool supporter. Actually, you wouldn't have known it. He fiercely defended Arsenal and its values and its thoughts when he was there, and he will do exactly the same at Tottenham. But I think he might be better at outlining where things are going and publicly doing that, because I think that's really important. The disconnect partially is because fans have been left in the dark a little bit, or even if they haven't, they feel they have been left in the dark. And sometimes you just need to know that people are saying the right things, are doing the right things, understand and share what you think. Don't always have to agree, by the way, but at least to have a better understanding of what it's all about has got to be a good thing.
Martin, for the last couple of years, all we keep seeing and hearing is reports about possible takeovers. Is this realistic?
Joe Lewis is going to want a huge sum of money, even though, of course, we know officially he doesn't own the club. No. He doesn't own the club. Nothing to do with Joe Lewis. It's in the Joe Lewis Trust, administered by his lawyer and his daughter. Come on. I mean, we all know the reality. So, 4.5 billion. Pony up the dough, and he'll probably sell. How many people, how many organisations can deliver that money? Nation states and maybe half a dozen billionaires. You get Elon Musk in, brilliant, but I think he's got other problems at the moment with Tesla and Trump. So how many nations, Saudi can't buy because they've got Newcastle. Abu Dhabi can't buy because they got City. Theoretically, Qatar could buy, but only effectively if they sold PSG, because they can't both play in the Champions League at the same time. So I'm not sure that Oman or Bahrain have necessarily got the willingness or the desire to spend 4.5 billion quid on a football club. So, it isn't that easy to find a buyer with that sort of cash. If someone turns up on the door with the money, though, of course they'll sell. It's turning a profit. That's exactly what businessmen do. But they want they want a proper price. They want what they think the club is worth, and why wouldn't they?
Martin, how did you celebrate when we won the Europa League? Does a journalist like you who's seen it, seen everything, did you get emotional like a lot of others?
Of course I did. I still I still cry watching the Lucas Moura hat-trick. I was sitting there. I didn't go. I was sitting there at home, and like anybody else who was sitting there at home, and most of those who were in the stadium, I suspect, I spent 90 minutes screaming about how poor the game was and how poor we were and how rubbish it was. And oh my God, we've won. It was like, and my boy jumped all over me. I jumped over him. We were in absolute bits because I'm still a fan at heart. I love Tottenham Hotspur. I do. It's my club. I've been going there on and off for over 50 years. And I didn't go at the parade, but I went on Sunday to Brighton, and I was crying then because I just love it. It was the emotional response is like nothing else, because if you're a fan, that's how you feel. And I'm a bit lachrymose anyhow. I mean, I cry watching Field of Dreams. I'm just rubbish. I can't help it. I cry watching pretty much everything, to be honest. I cry when I look in the mirror, but that's another issue. And so yeah, it was bloody brilliant. Absolutely incredible. It was just a fabulous, fabulous feeling, and that's exactly what it's for. What it's about. You're supposed to feel like that. It's supposed to matter. It really matters.
Yeah, that parade was incredible.
It's only what it is, though. I can't let my life be determined by the fortunes of Tottenham Hotspur, because I'd never go out of the house. I'd never talk to anyone. I'd be beyond miserable. Now, people might say, hey, you should never go out of the house. You shouldn't ever talk to one, and you deserve to be miserable. I don't think I do. But that's it. You have to get on with it. But when it happens, those moments of high drama and high emotion, they capture your soul, don't they? That's why we love the game.
Martin, what's it like you being a Spurs fan within the media? Because I tell you what I was really surprised about. Well, what I was really surprised about is the day after the sacking of Postecoglou, a lot of the newspapers, if not all of the newspapers, were quite sympathetic towards that decision. And a lot of them said that he should have been given a third season.
Well, that's fine, but they're not Spurs fans, are they?
Yeah, but these are the guys that have been quite harsh and critical in press conferences.
Well, they're perfectly allowed that opinion. I just think they're wrong. But that's not being, that doesn't mean I'm right. It's just my opinion is it was the correct decision. But if you work with someone, even though, look, I don't know what Kilpatrick said, who I really like him. He's a decent fella. I think that the way Ange jumped down his throat was poor, actually, because it was just a throwaway line in the column. It wasn't. He wasn't saying, "I think you're a clown." It's you'll be viewed as a clown if you end up winning nothing, despite what you said. And others too, a lot of them like him. They might be critical, but they genuinely like him as a bloke. They didn't. I don't mind managers having a dig at me, because it means they've read it.
Have they?
Well, they can't. They won't have a dig at you if they're not read it, can they?
No, but have any previous Spurs managers had a dig at you?
Oh, Jerry had a few digs at me, yeah, when he was manager. But remember, I've not been covering Spurs on a regular basis for over 10 years. I don't do as much.
Yeah.
I don't do much live football anymore. So previous managers, I had rows with Harry. I had issues. I actually got on with AVB. I didn't think. I was very critical of Sherwood's brief reign. I thought he was going bonkers. And a few others as well. You know, I didn't get Santini. I like Martin Jol. I did, really. But I thought it was time for him to go. The way they did it, I wouldn't have done, but I actually think it was the right call. Ramos clearly wasn't working. When you meet, you've got to be willing to have a question. But I never did it. For me, it was never personal. It was just what I saw. There are people who I don't like, people I do like, because that's the nature of human beings. But I would never want it to get personal. A couple of times with other managers of other national teams, shall we say, it has got personal. Not because I wanted it to, but they've taken it to that extent, which they're perfectly entitled to do. Don't have to like me, crikey. You know,
Martin, of course, social media, you know, things are absolutely everywhere. But back in the day when you were writing for the Sun or various other newspapers, do you believe that a lot of these managers do actually read the articles? Because were you surprised that Postecoglou on a number of occasions come out and said, "I've seen what you've written"?
Well, some of them actually have people in the club whose job is to cut out the pieces and give them to them. So yes, they do. Right. Others don't take any notice of it. I think in the past, more managers were English, more players were English. They read newspaper because their parents had read newspapers, and their parents had read newspapers, and newspapers were read by 3, 4, 5 million people every day, as opposed to 3, 4, 500,000 people every day. They had far more weight than they did. It was, often it was the era before 24-hour sports news and 24-hour rolling news, and before social media. So the majority of people got their information from newspapers, radio, and teletext. Things have changed now. So the weight of papers has definitely been reduced just because of that. But I'm sure that someone like Postecoglou, growing up in Australia, probably was a newspaper reader. He's of the age, my sort of age, mid-50s. He grew up reading newspapers. So when he comes over to England, he's going to read newspapers. A 36-year-old Portuguese coach is not going to read an English newspaper. He might read Mais Football or Record or Abola. He isn't going to read the Mail or the Sun or the Mirror, is he? No chance. Why should he? Why should you expect him to? So it all depends on the individual and their age and their profile and their background.
Martin, can I ask what you had an argument with Harry Redknapp about then? Can you tell us?
It was probably before he was at Spurs, but we did have one about. Oh, there's a few actually over the minor. We laughed them off. Because you're allowed to have a row.
These are the sort of things that the viewers and listeners want to know.
Yeah, but it's like there was a few things. I mean, I did get involved with one over. He did an interview where he slagged up when he was at Portsmouth actually, where he slagged off Milan Mandaric, and then claimed he hadn't done it, and rang me up to tell me he really hadn't done it. And I said, but I've seen the bloody video, and another one when he was at QPR. And I had a few players there, South American players. Well, I probably shouldn't say that, but it was 15 years ago, telling me about what a disgrace things were at QPR. And I had him on the blower, giving me all sorts of stuff. And then 6 months later, he's in a different job, and we're all getting on again. It's like it's what you do. I mean, I did the first interview when he talked about the court case before it was when it was still ongoing. And I went down to something at Spurs, and he was brilliant on it. We talked really well, what he could say, what he couldn't say. We both knew the parameters. Are you okay with this? We'll find, So you're allowed to have fallouts with managers. I always thought it was really healthy. And if I had a go at someone, particularly when I was doing lots of life, I thought it was absolutely imperative that the next opportunity I was sat in front of them. So if they had an issue, they could tell me. And I didn't take it. You've got every right to have a dig. If you don't like it, tell me why. We can talk about it. Because that's important. I was never scared to front up because I sound silly. the worst thing that could happen in that circumstance would have been the best thing that could happen to me, because they'd have been indebted to me forever. Let's think about the worst thing that could happen in a press conference between a manager and a reporter, and I'm not going to leave my seat. So what's the worst thing that can happen? Who's in trouble then? It ain't me. It's the manager. So yeah, you got to be willing to. But that was then. I mean, it's a different age now. I don't think you have the same degree of interplay and relationship, because you only get 3 minutes at a press conference. You look back to pre-COVID, how long a press conference would last. You'd have separate briefings of TV going for 15 minutes and 15 minutes of dailies, and then 10, 12 minutes of Sundays. Now the whole thing's over in 12 minutes.
Yeah.
You haven't got time to have a row. It's a very different scenario.
Martin, before we talk about Thomas Frank, you mentioned about knowing Donna Cullen. I've got to ask, have you had much dealings at all with Daniel Levy at all over the years?
Not many. I did have a sit down with him. It was myself and Jason Burt, who's now on the Telegraph. We sat down with him in, was it Bremen? First game of the Champions League? I think it was Werder Bremen in 2010. And we went to the hotel, and Jason and I spoke to him, and we had 20 minutes. He was actually really good and chatted. And that's without question the longest period. I've had brief social interactions with him, shall we say, and met him at Premier League shareholders meetings and a couple of times at other functions. But I can't say I've spent much time in his company, no. But what I do know from that is that he's a very shy man. He's not someone who craves publicity. Never has. I did think it was interesting because he stand on that dais in Bilbao next to Jim Ratcliffe, and for the first few minutes I don't think he knows what to do. I don't think he couldn't quite, the scale of the emotion around him would have been, it looked to me as he was overwhelmed by it, and Ratcliffe was as angry could be, and Daniel didn't know what to do, because he's not seen those smiles for his 25 years as Spurs chairman, has he?
Yeah.
And I think he was, I think had they lost, the decision would have been done before the Brighton game. I think the sheer scale of the emotion made them realise that they had to give it a bit of passage of time. But I still think, as I said, they ended up with the right call for me.
Martin, on Monday, you put out an article with the heading "Flexible Thomas Frank and Tottenham are the perfect match."
Yeah. I think he's an outstanding candidate. Look, had they gone for Oliver Glasner, I'd have been pretty happy. Yeah. I think, whilst I certainly had an understanding of the appeal of Antonio Raiola, it felt a bit too much like another version of Ange. If you look at Bournemouth, they did really well till they ran out of legs. They ran out of legs later than Spurs did because they had fewer games to play, and the football was the same. And look at the injuries they've ended up getting as the season has gone on because of the way they play. And if it had been Marco Silva, I'd have been only marginally less unhappy than I was when Nuno got the job. But I've been hugely impressed with everything I've seen of Thomas Frank during his spell at Brentford. I've watched him grow. I first came across him, I was at a dinner, at LMA dinner. We were on the same table 7 years ago. And I was fascinated with talking to him then. I felt there was something about him. There's a sparkle in his eyes, an intensity, a sense of purpose that I was really impressed by. And I've not come across him more than half a dozen occasions since. But I have read a lot of the things he said and watched a lot of the things he said, in addition to the interviews that I've had with him. I like managers who talk in paragraphs rather than sentences, who have depth and understanding, who have a vision that they can explain, but also prove by their actions what they can do, that they are adaptable, that they recognise you need to build a bond with the fans. Ask the Brentford fans what they feel about it.
Yeah.
And they're not used to having managers they care about that deeply. He stood up for that club. He didn't go mad, but they all knew he was their man, their manager. He dealt with losing most of his best players over the course of time. Look, he came up with Mbeumo and Benrahma and Watkins. He didn't actually come up. He lost two of them before he came up. Came up with playing quite attacking football. Realised if we do that, we'll be cut to pieces. Look at what happened to Burnley and Southampton over the last 2 years when they tried to stick to their principles, having come up, they were eviscerated. So he did become a little bit more simplistic in his approach. He changed the way they played. They're more direct, etc. Each season they become more progressive. And Bremo's been outstanding for them. He dealt with Tony, scored loads of goals. Tony was disappeared effectively for 8 months, and then even when he came back, his head was still all over the place, and then he's gone. So in the meantime, he just developed Visser. And the way they play has been really progressive. And the other thing, 2 goals conceded from set pieces last year, 11 over the last 2 seasons. We conceded 2 against Brighton alone on the last day of the season.
Yeah.
Simple things like that. If you don't concede from corners and free kicks more than 12, 6 or 7 a season, you've probably got another 8 points guaranteed. Just because he's really smart. And what I think the fans will realise is how clever he is and how good he is at setting an agenda in a press conference, which I know press conferences, it sends out a message. And when he spoke as Brentford manager, it's 12 past, Thomas Frank says. When he speaks as Spurs manager, it's a back page lead and a full spread in the paper. And it's 5 minutes on Sky Sports News plus a 10-minute discussion. Because when you're Spurs manager, what you say matters. It has a resonance far greater than when you're Brentford manager. It just does. And so those who don't quite know him are going to see what he's all about. And they'll sense from, I suspect, from minute one of day one, that there's something about him that the players will buy into too.
Martin, you mentioned that vision. Is he going to get the time, the patience, the tools, and what is going to be different under Thomas Frank going forward?
That is, I suppose, what they call the $64,000 question, isn't it? We don't know until we see, in terms of will he get what he wants. You're never stronger than when you first go in the job. So if he wants 5 or 6 players, this is the time to ask for them, because the board will have to give him at least the majority of what he wants as far as they can. But if that means selling a few players to make that possible, then that's right as well. I think actually, because of the nature of the man and the bond he will build with the players and the fans quite quickly, you may get the start of that unity I was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. And there's a new, with enough new bodies on the board looking to make a fresh start, that can be positive as well. So yeah. I think the answer is yes, that it will happen. But no one can be certain about that because things can change, as we know in football. There's no guarantees in football other than the season will normally start in August and finish in May. But as we saw in COVID, even that's not a certainty. Nothing can be guaranteed. I think that there will be funds made available for a certain type of player that he wants. We don't quite know what he feels he needs, but I think there'll be significant outgoings, which I think is important and necessary.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Do you see this as another reset by the club, or is it where Thomas Frank just comes in and just tweaks a few bits, a few players here and there, and takes that momentum of winning that trophy and keeping the majority of those players that have enjoyed that success with the Europa League?
I think it all depends on the players and what's available and what you have to do. Fans just want you to spend and don't care about the price. And I get that because you're not looking at the numbers, but the club has to look at the numbers. Effectively, for every pound of profit you make in the transfer market, you can spend 5 because you amortize over 5-year contract length. Spurs have got, with their really good income stream, and next year the income stream with Champions League, which is a minimum for Spurs of, including the Super Cup, 48 million quid in European UEFA money without kicking a ball. you know you're going to get, without kicking a ball in the Premier League, £100 million plus the commercials. So Tottenham's revenues next season will be, I suspect, north of £600 million, probably nearer £700 million. It's a lot of money. But also, it's a reasonable position to argue that there's a pretty broad correlation between how much you pay in wages and what you get on the pitch. So you have to be willing to spend money to get players, but you also, to get players, have to be willing to sell players. Apart from Real Madrid and Manchester City and Barcelona and PSG, every club in football is a selling club, and even they are selling clubs. You know, PSG lost Mbappe, Man City let Cole Palmer go. Everyone's a selling club. There are players at Spurs who, if the right offer comes in, look, Son Heung-min, absolutely brilliant, incredible. Nobody deserved to lift that trophy more than him. But if there's a Saudi club out there who are offering north of £60 million, I'm snatching your hand off, because his legs are gone. We've all seen it. What did he do when he came on in that final? He couldn't play. It's just, everything has a shelf life. If Romero wants to go, that's a real shame. How many games does he play over the course of the season? Who does he really care about playing for? Is it Tottenham Hotspur or is it Argentina? So if Atletico Madrid are going to pay £60 million or more, you let him go, because you can. That gives you, just those two, at least you could nominally spend 500 million in the transfer market. Now, Spurs wouldn't spend 500 million, but it gives you room to buy players you want. That's the business of football. And you can't pretend that isn't the business of football. That's the way it works.
Martin, is it realistic that Son moves on this summer? Because I know you're going to say, so what? I know exactly what you're going to say, so what? Because we're going to South Korea for pre-season.
Oh, well, yeah, but pre-season, yeah. There's 5 weeks between pre-season and the end of the transfer window. You know, one last squeeze of the cash cow's udder, isn't it? That's my view. You know, look, I want him. There can be nothing better than for Son's last act as a Spurs player.
Yeah.
To lift that trophy.
Yeah,
I agree. What a wonderful way to go. And again, an icon of the club. 5th highest score in the history of Tottenham. One of our greatest players. But all the others have left. Because that's what happens. No, yeah. If people stayed on forever, you'd be playing 70-year-olds. Mind you, occasionally last season I thought we were. And, you know, it's just what is. That doesn't diminish what they achieve by any stretch. Sometimes it's just the right time. I'm not saying he's got to go. But if we're being honest, what do you expect from him if he stays next season? How many games is he going to play? How many goals is he going to score? Yeah. It's diminishing returns. I think it genuinely is, because we've had 11 seasons out of him and they've been, in the main, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. And it's not only that, he's played under so many different managers at Spurs during his time. And like you said, he could leave on a high, having lifted that trophy. But I don't know whether you've seen it, Martin. Earlier today, whilst on international duty, he was asked about his future, and he said, it's better for us to wait and see rather than making any statements. So let's wait and see on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think that's pointing to the potential writing that might be about to be put on the wall, isn't it? But we don't know. Maybe not. Also, he needs to talk to the manager. If Frank says to him, look, you're going to play 15 games for me because I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
But we've had an offer. What do you think? I did a piece before the final, which was actually going back to my book, which I wrote all those years ago. And when I spoke to Alan Mundy, and he was saying, you know, I scored the winning goal in the UEFA Cup final, and then I was sold by Bill Nicholson because he told me, I've got my eye on 2 players who are better than you. And Alan Murray was a Spurs captain, a legend of the club. nothing lasts forever.
Yeah.
It's football. It really is. And it's no one's fault. It's not a criticism of the player that you sell. Often it's a mark of tribute that you'll say to him, thank you. But it's time.
Martin, what do you make of these decisions? Things like Ben Davies, exercised his contract to keep him at the club for another year without actually appointing a manager. Because I know, you're old school in the way that back in the day, all of these things used to be the manager's decision, and now a lot of these things, not only at Spurs but the Premier League in general, seem to be club decisions. Is that right, in your opinion?
I think it's sensible because managers only last for 2 or 3 years and the club's there forever. Well, hopefully forever. So you need to have a long-term plan. You can't just rely on the short-term wishes of an individual manager who may or may not work. I think that Ben Davies will spend more of his time on the training ground, coaching effectively over the next 18 months than anything else. I think Ben Davies could quite possibly be a future Tottenham manager. I think he'll probably be a future Swansea manager first, but I think he'll be a future Tottenham manager and a future Wales manager, not only because he speaks Welsh, which not everybody does these days. Certainly I don't. And he's also, everyone tells me, one of the best blokes the club has had in the last 20 years. A genuinely fantastic human being, a great fella, and gets the club. But he's also a really, he's a smart football player, and he will never be 9 out of 10. But he'll rarely be below 7. He knew his limitations and he played in a number of roles. And I don't think he ever let anyone down. He may not have always played well, but it wasn't through lack of effort or determination or intelligence or anything else. It was sometimes you don't play well. But he gets the club. And I think he'd be a really important voice in the dressing room, even if he's not playing anymore. I really think that. And there'll be games when he might want to play him in the League Cup or whatever, just to keep it, as long as he's able to do it. But if he played 12 games a season, that's enough. You've got to look at, it's not just that you're allowed 25-man squad, yes, but you've got to have 7 to 8 of those who are homegrown or in certain forms. Anyone under 21 doesn't count. So Bergvall and Gray don't count in the 25. Tell if he stays, not sure if he doesn't count in the 25. It might do in Europe, but for the Premier League, they definitely don't. So it's a slightly different regime for the various competitions. So it does make a bit of a difference, actually, in terms of what your makeup of your squad is. We don't know what they're going to do with some of those players who are coming back. The younger players, Donnelly and Keeley from Orient. Scarlett obviously came back. Lancashire will come back from West Brom. We didn't score, played a few games. They probably most of them might need championship loans again. Depends what we've got, but maybe they don't. Maybe it's time. What happened to Divine? I haven't seen him for 3 years. Have they decided he's no good? I don't know. Other players too. So, the boy Abbott, who did really well at Notts County, maybe he's not quite good enough. In which case, then okay, well, either give him a go in the championship or sell him. That's fine, and that's the way it works. You've got to be willing to look at that as well.
Martin, you talk about that decision about Alan Mullery going out the door. Who out of this Spurs squad would you like to see head out the door this summer?
Well, some of them already gone. The immobile statue number 3 goalkeeper or 4 goalkeeper, I can't work. He had 1 or 2 good games, but my gosh, Fraser Forster was looking his age, wasn't he? I think Yves Bissouma should go. I see no reason to keep him at all. I don't think he's done enough. I don't think every time he runs back into his own box, you're thinking, no, don't, because you know what he's going to do. As he did against, I think it was Brighton, wasn't he? He gave 1 away. As he did against Chelsea, gave 1. I mean, he's not improved, has he, since he came to the club? He had a really good spell till he got sent off at Luton last season, season before last, the first Postecoglou season. And ever since then, he's been poor. He has been poor. He's had the odd moment, the odd game, but over 3 or 4 games, he's been poor. So I think he's run his race. If you could give me a guarantee that Richarlison would play 40 games, I'd keep him. But you can't, because he's never fit. Players who aren't fit are no good to you, I'm afraid. And I think he's a good, when he's on the pitch, he's great, but he's not on the pitch enough. I'm not. I think he had a good moments last season. I'm still not sold on Jed Spence. I'm afraid, just personally, I'm not convinced. I'm not discarding completely, and I love the way his family celebrated and everything else. And there were moments when I was quite impressed. But is he better on either flank than the other two? And I'm not sure he is. Is he the right one you want as backup in that regard? I'm not sure, but you need to have players. You need to have bodies to fill out the squad. Whom else? Benton Court, question mark.
Well, it sounds like he's going to get a new contract.
Well, fine. You know, I'm not saying definitely. Dragusin, can't get rid of him because he's injured, but I don't think he's good enough. I think we've signed the only Romanian hard man who's softer than me. You know.
What about Romero?
Look, when he plays, he's arguably the best centre half in the world. You put him up there with the likes in the Premier League with Van Dijk and Saliba, who are the two best, I'd say. But he's right up in that category. He's fantastic when he plays. But as I said, his head's more with Argentina than Spurs. And if that's going to continue to be the case, what's the smart play? How if you as I said, if he's going to play 35 Premier League games switched on, there is nobody I'd rather have a centre half on the planet on the right side as a right-sided centre half. He's brilliant. But how many games is he going to play? Now it may be if we're playing with a lower block, he's less exposed, but he still goes stupid. He got away with a few he got a few sendings off, but he could have been sent off 4 or 5 more times because he has these bizarre headless chicken moments, doesn't he? When he goes 70 yards to foul somebody, like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing there? And then what are you doing there fouling somebody when all you can do is get a card and maybe a red card? It's bonkers, isn't it? It really is. And yet when he switches on, like he did for most of those 3 away games in Europe, or the Frankfurt, Glimt, and then United, fabulous. The way he wound up Maguire, really smart. He knew what he was doing. He wanted to get Maguire going because he knew that would waste time without him being the one who was wasting time. He knew exactly what he was doing. It was, there's a word which begins with S and ends in Housery, which we all know, which I won't say on your. That was a perfect example of it. And you actually need a bit of a bastard sometimes on the pitch, don't you? It's really important. Nice guys are great, but you need a bit of the other side of it to win in football. You can't be nice all the time. And I'm not sure he's nice any of the time on the pitch, but he's a hell of a fearsome prospect when he plays. But how many times does he play? How many times will he play?
Yeah. Martin, just a quick yes or no on this one. Matisse Tell, would you like to see him come back?
I've not seen enough to say he needs to come back. I'm not saying that means get rid, but were he not to come back, I wouldn't be ringing up and screaming and shouting about it. Because I don't, he's got a good goal against Villa, missed a sitter against Brighton, scored a penalty, scored another goal, but he didn't exactly set the world alight, did he?
I feel like there's something there, but it's another patience job, isn't it? Waiting.
How many of those can you have in the squad?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I feel like we need experienced players.
Is he better than Mikey Moore?
Yeah.
My understanding is Mikey Moore had glandular fever. That takes its toll on people, particularly when you're a young kid. Let's see where Moore is in September. Let's see if he's actually able to be the player we saw against Alkmaar in October, November, that we thought, blimey, that second half when he switched left was just mesmerising, wasn't it? Absolutely incredible. And this is what we saw from him in England youth ranks last summer, something truly special. But clearly he was ill, and it's anyone who knows kids who've had glandular fever, which I said is my understanding of what it was. That no one's ever said that, but that's my understanding. It could take 6 months or more to come out of it. And also he's growing all the time. So let's just see.
Martin, who do you consider within this Spurs squad, who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers under Thomas Frank? Who is going to get the most game time? Because you look at a player like Archie Gray, Brentford very nearly signed him before he signed for Spurs. So Frank obviously wanted him. Solanke, will he have a different role within this Tottenham team now under Frank?
Well, if you look at Brentford, they've played with a 9 who leads the line, don't they? So they had Tony and they've had Visser or Sharda. And Solanke, with his height, with his incredible work rate, strikes me as being a Frank type of player. He really will do that work. He's a totem. You can play up to him. He can do that. He'll work hard and press. So yeah, I think he will definitely have a significant role to play. It would help if there's an understudy who can play games to allow him to work half of 70 minutes occasionally, rather than playing 90 upon 90 upon 90. The other one who you've got to think will have a really positive position is last season's top goal scorer, because he also was targeted by Thomas Frank at Brentford, Brennan Johnson, before he went to Spurs from Forest. So again, you think if Frank fancied him then, why wouldn't he fancy him now? Gray, as you said, Bergvall definitely will have a massive role to play. So those are just four straight up. It'd be interesting to see how he works out the balance between Maddison and Kulusevski, but of course we may not know that until January.
Yeah.
So it may not be an issue for the first 3 months. Plus, if Kulusevski's injury, we don't quite know the extent of it, but clearly it's a bad one, because the fact that he couldn't even turn up for the parade tells you that it's significant. There are things that are going on, so that's a concern, obviously. But yeah, that will be an interesting issue. What do you think about Odobert? Do not know. What do you think of Danso? Don't know. There's a lot of imponderables there, aren't there? Does he play?
Yeah.
But if he plays with a 3 at the back occasionally, then Danso, as he showed when he came on in those European games, he's pretty adept at getting his body in the way and being a part of that 3. I'm not necessarily sure I'd want him to be part of a 2 too often, but as a 3, yes.
There's quite often the saying from fans in particular about, the manager must be backed. Can I ask you, what is the definition of backing the manager?
Giving him bolts that fit the holes that he identifies, screws that fit. Doesn't necessarily mean that every one of them's got to be a £70 million player, because that's not going to happen. But it's about players who the moment they sign them work in the way he wants to play. So you had Conte talking about club signings and my signings. Now, I don't think you'll hear that from Frank, because he'd be stupid. It wouldn't be beneficial to do that. And also he doesn't want to cause a row. But I do think you need to see that there's a joined up thinking between the manager and the board over the players that do come in. And it'll be obvious when you look at who they are. And it can be a £20 million player who works.
Yeah.
If he goes to them and says, I want look, if Mbeumo comes in, it'd be pretty obvious who's asked for him. Likewise, there's talk about the boy from Bournemouth. Again, you can see that being another Frank type player. But left back will be interesting. If he thinks Rico Henry's going to get fit, and he's been out for 18 months, and I'm not sure he will, that's the best left back in England when he's fit. For me, he'd have gone to the Euros last year if he hadn't broken his leg. I've done his ACL. So there could be, it's about genuinely marrying up the players that are brought in with what the manager wants to do, and also the players who go out. If a player who you might think would be a club player goes, then that's the manager's decision.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's not difficult to ascertain from what you see what's happening.
Martin, last couple of questions for you. The boy, as you called him, Semenyo from Bournemouth, £70 million is the figure being quoted. Are these valuations just mental now?
Yeah, but that's football. Football's mental. You know, you're talking about silly valuations, but in a captive market where clubs are earning, as we said, £600 million plus a year, guaranteed in Spurs' case is 150 million without kicking a ball just from the Premier League and UEFA alone. 70 million divided by 5 years is £14 million a year. Plus his wages. What's that?
Yeah.
Another 8 million a year. So you're talking about 22 million a year, effectively, out of 650 million budget or income. As silly as it sounds, it's nothing. It's nothing.
You mentioned Mbeumo. Do you think it's realistic that he could come to Spurs, given that Manchester United are going to reportedly pay him between £200,000 and £250,000 a week, because Spurs are never going to be paying that amount?
Spurs aren't going to pay that amount, but United have got to pay that amount because of the mess they're in. He's going to them because he knows about their weakness. Anyone going to Manchester United is going to add 35% plus onto their contract demands because they know United are in a fearful mess.
Yeah.
Spurs are in the Champions League. He knows Thomas Frank. He can stay at home, doesn't have to upstick his family and all of that. It might, I'm not saying it will happen, but there are different factors involved in a move for a Brentford player joining his former Brentford manager at a club that's 8 miles round the North Circular from Brentford, than going 200 miles to play for a team that's not in Europe next season, when the team 8 miles round the North Circular is playing in the Champions League.
Martin, where do you see Jack Grealish's future? Could it be Spurs?
I don't think so. I think that boat's flown, as it were. Boat sailed away. He should have gone a few years ago. I think it was a mistake not to get him, even though the price was ridiculous. And actually, it wasn't that ridiculous at the time. It was like 5 million would have got him from Villa, wouldn't it? More than Spurs were willing to bid. But things have moved on. It's changed. He's gone to City. He's been, I wouldn't say ill-used, because part of it's down to him as well. But I think he's had some of his inner Jack Grealish taken out of him by Guardiola's process-driven coaching. And we've got Maddison and we've got Kulusevski, and we've got potentially, if they see it, Donnelly already within the club. Do you really need another one? I mean, the one I would go for now is Eze rather than Grealish.
I was going to ask that. The three Crystal Palace boys, Eze, Wharton and Mark Gay, we keep being linked with all three of them. Is it realistic?
All three, no. What I love about Wharton is he takes everything side on, opens himself up. He was struggling at the start of the season. He wasn't fit. He was really at the injury, and it was the half the player he was last year. But he's got fit now. Towards the end of the season, he got better and better. Very, very smart. Plays it quick when he needs to play it quick. Plays it slow when he needs to play it slow. Gay, rock solid centre half. If it's a Romero out, Gay in, I don't think anyone would complain about that at all. Albeit he prefers to play left rather than right, which might be a bit of an issue with Van der Ven, but he can probably cope with moving on a little bit inside. And Eze, I think, is a fantastic talent. Love watching him play.
Yeah.
He's really enjoyed playing under Glasner, as we see. At the start of the season, he struggled because they'd lost Elise, Wharton wasn't there. He wasn't particularly at it, and Mateta wasn't scoring goals. As the season's gone on, he got better and better, scored some fantastic goals. Obviously, we saw what we did at Wembley. Genuine talent. And I'd definitely like any of those. I think they would benefit what we've got. But if you get Eze in, you might wonder about Maddison and or Kulusevski long term.
Yeah.
Just because you can't have too many of the players in that position.
Martin, last question. Where do you see Spurs in 12 months' time?
Oh my God! If only I knew that. I'd have been down the bookies. I don't think we'll be 17th next season. I think we will be, I'm hoping and believing that in 12 months' time, we will think, yeah, it was hard to make that call, but events have proven it was the right call. There's something building here that's serious and genuine and long-term under a manager who understands each and every one of us as fans and is making something happen to make us more excited than we've been since peak Pochettino.
Martin, I'm gutted to say last question because I could literally talk to you all night about football and never get me and you in the pub because we'll be there all day. Thank you so much for coming on. Really, really enjoy our chats, and hopefully we can get you back on again very soon. But before you do go, tell everyone where they can find you and what you're up to at the moment.
Well, I'm still at the Sun, and I'm on Twitter at Martin Lipton, and I don't really do much else social media. I don't really do that much on Twitter, really. I am always available for any options in terms of earning a few bob. No, as you know, Chris, you don't pay me, and nor should you. I love talking football. Always have, always will. I love the game. That will hopefully never change. And even when it's miserable, and my God, it's been miserable a few times, there's always next week.
If that's the case, Martin, we'll have you on every week. So I'll see you next week. Thank you so much. Enjoy your summer, and we'll speak to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening. And until the next time, come on, you Spurs.